Alright boys, another little update here on the progress of the Redneck side-by-side. You can see I finally got the rear end pulled out of place here. It does also have a 4-on-4 bolt pattern, which is very universal to go-kart parts, and actually some lawnmower rims will cross over to this as well. Planning on actually switching these rear tires out to something a little better. Thinking I'm going to use these guys right here. These are the Mag off-road tires. They're a little heavy, but I think they'll work good because this is going to be kind of a low speed rig. It's not going to be super high speed. The nice balloony tires will absorb some of the shock because of the lack of rear suspension. That's right, I'm not using rear suspension. I just don't have time to engineer all that shit. I just want to get this thing kind of working for the family. You can see it's a 25-inch tall, 10-inch wide tire, 12-inch rim. Also has the 4-on-4 bolt pattern. One of them, as you can see, is very flat. It's almost like taco flat. I mean, seriously, look at that thing. The other one holds air. So there it is with the rear tires and wheels bolted onto the rear axle. It's obviously not attached. It's just floating there. I got the chassis supported by a jack stand. I did toy with height. I went up a little bit, I went down a little bit, and I kind of settled on just keeping it kind of level. I know a lot of people are going to give me shit saying I should lift it, and I could get away with lifting it real easy, but then I'd have to lift the front. But up front here you can see there's a lot more going on. It's not quite as easy to just lift. There's a little bit of steering linkage, shocks, and I'd have to build drop brackets for the spring mounts. I have an incredibly bad habit of building things for the family, and then just making them way too ridiculously fast or out of control, and then nobody wants to ride them anymore. So I'm actually going to try to stick by it this time and legitimately make this for people that want to come over and just ride around, because even that go-kart I built last year is just a little crazy for some people. They don't feel comfortable on it. So the next order of business is going to be for me to build some runners, some mounts, to box in this chassis so this doesn't flex at all. I'm not going to use suspension, as I mentioned before. I'm going to do a similar setup to how the guy originally before me had it, just solid mounting it, and now that I got these big tires, I'm going to hope if I run low PSI, they'll just absorb some of the bumps and the shocks, and it's not going to, like I said, this isn't going to be super high speed anyways, so hopefully it'll be okay. Alright, we're making some good progress here. I got the 1x2-inch rectangular tube steel welded into place. It actually tucked up in where the front leaf spring mounts are, really nice. These are actually shackles from standard trailer leaf springs, and they actually, the bolts line up pretty good with these, the bolt pattern for the old U-bolts here for the rear end. So actually what I'm going to do, I think they're going to be probably like 7/16 inch bolts, come down through and basically put these plates on the bottom of this rectangular steel, and you can see where I'm going with this. Basically the bolts will pass through and lock this rear end down into place. I'll probably even go the extra mile and weld these things right to the bottom right here, so there's no risk of the rear end sliding like that one way or the other. So that'll be pretty good. Well, there, I was fortunate in that I actually found 8 nuts and bolts that were long enough and the right size to bolt my axle down to the new pieces of steel using those little shackle plates I showed you earlier. And yeah, I did end up welding the bottom sides just so the axle doesn't shift back and forth under a load or whatever external forces might happen to be exerted onto these wheels. So I couldn't help myself, I had to continue working on this thing. I started working on the bearing support here. You can see there's actually a bearing already mounted in with a shaft that has been welded to the axle drive. Here's the bearing support. I'll get this thing back down on all fours so it makes more sense, but you can see it's all welded in place there. Should be pretty sturdy. So here's a slightly better view of it from above. You can see I actually just used more pieces of this 1x2 rectangular tube steel up here. But let's back up a little bit and basically show you the shaft. What we've got here essentially is this is 1-inch axle shaft. You know, I just cut a small 1-foot section out. It's nice and straight. I basically welded it centric onto the original spline thimble thing that from the electric motor that actually spliced on to these weird splines here on this thing. I've showed you that before, I think. But this just all kind of slides on like that, and as the whole golf cart rolls, it's all supported by this bearing here. on the outside edge. So should be a very rugged setup. I didn't decide to do 2 bearings because I thought that was just ridiculous amounts of overkill. There's actually 2 bearings built into this housing, and a lot of people who've done this conversion, I'm not the only one who's done these, just put sprockets right on here and they don't seem to have a problem. So in doing this with this third support, it should just be absolutely ridiculous strength wise. Alright guys, so check this out. I worked a little late into the night last night because I did some research on what it would take to repair the brakes, the drum brakes on this golf cart axle, and I found out that just the cables alone were 80 bucks and then the rebuild kits were about 60 bucks a side. So I was going to be into these brakes for about $200, which I wasn't really enthused about, to say the least. So I came up with an idea, and since I have a 1-inch jack shaft here, which is essentially axle shaft, I decided to reuse an old set of mechanical brakes from the lifted mudding mower build and basically set that on there. I got a locking ring between the bearing and the hub here. Calipers mounted. You can see here on the other side, regular caliper. I set it up so when you pull it down, it engages the brake mechanism. So basically I have to work some linkage that will pull this thing downwards, and I've got to figure out a way to connect this whole thing up to the brake pedal that's already into place. Up here on the brake pedal, it's already got a spring return built into it, as well as actually a parking brake mechanism. You can lock that down in the downward position and then it automatically unlocks. Another cool feature is when you actually lock the parking brake, if you push the gas pedal, it also automatically releases the brake, so that's actually a really cool little safety feature for the kids and everybody if they're driving this thing. But the linkage mechanism has been partially been removed by me, and this just kind of gets pulled back and forth as you function the brake lever. So it actually looks pretty easy to adapt to. I can either keep this and use it and put the spring back in and just put in a new piece of rod, or I can remove this thing completely, as it's got like a little eyelet right there, and that would also be really easy to adapt into with something like this right here if I decided to go with that route. So I got a lot of options here. I already can hear the comments of people saying that these brakes are never going to work because these tires are so big and this thing is so heavy, and normally I would agree with you. However, you have to remember that these brakes are hooked up to this jack shaft, which there's a 15-to-1 reduction ratio between this jack shaft and this differential and these wheels. So realistically, this brake is about 15 times more powerful on these wheels than it would be if it was just sitting here on an axle shaft. It's kind of hard for me to explain, but some preliminary tests of just pushing it back and forth here in the garage, I can easily lock up the rear tires just using my thumb to push down in that little brake mechanism. So at the very least, these brakes will slow you down. Alright, so pressing forward here, you can see I've already got my first linkage attached here, and it's attached with a spring. And that is so when you reach the end of the brakes, you still get a slightly squishy pedal feel. It doesn't just end abruptly, and it doesn't just immediately lock up the rear tires. It's a much smoother brake transition if you use a spring. That's not the original spring that was in here. The original one was huge, so I definitely downgraded to a slightly softer one. But that linkage basically comes back into here. And what I got to do now is figure out a way to transfer this forward and backward energy, basically from front to back, to an up and down energy to function this brake caliper. And for that, I'm going to use, I think this is like MTD lawnmower deck hardware. But the idea is that this is actually going to sit down on the cross bracing, and this little hole will attach to this linkage here. So as that brake pedal gets pushed forward and backwards, it will rotate, and I will put another piece of linkage pointing off the back. And that way, when this whole linkage twists, it will pull downwards on this brake lever. So that was actually a lot easier than I was expecting. You can see I got the linkages pretty much all attached there. And building the mounting bracket was a lot easier than I anticipated. I just basically used a piece of 1-inch square tube steel, about 2 inches long, and welded it into this angle steel channel and mounted one end of my brake linkage, which you can see it move right there. I mounted one side to that, and the other side over here I welded in another piece of 1-inch square tube stock and basically welded the other side of the brake mechanism to that side. So now you can see actually the very large return spring, which actually exists from a trampoline, But you can see the brake linkage right there. As I push, the foot brake is actually working. Here it is looking from the other side. So as you can see, the setup's pretty simple. It's all mechanical, it's all linkage, no cables. Very cheap and easy for me to set up because I had all the linkages. You can see that this spring here really helps like dampen the pedal feel. You can see it kind of compresses as it pulls against the other return spring there. As you can see now that when I spin the wheels by hand, they're actually really easy to lock up with the foot brake right now as it is. Only time will tell how effective these brakes actually are once I get a load and people and a motor attached to everything, but we'll see how that goes. So obviously the big nagging downfall of this brake setup is if the axle breaks internally, the spider gears, the carrier, the bearings, the axle shafts themselves, anything like that, then basically you have no braking power whatsoever. You've essentially lost all that because the brake energy is actually transferred through the axle housing. So there's definitely some trade-offs to this brake system. The big positive being that it actually cost me generally nothing because I already had the parts. I'm sure I'll have to tweak things a bit as I get used to them, as we drive it, as we use it, and basically figure out the bugs that we have to work out. The steering's already done because the chassis is already good. So we got a rolling chassis with brakes now, which is awesome. So all I need to do now is get myself a sprocket, a drivetrain, and figure out basically how we're driving this axle. And I got a generally good idea on how I'm going to do that. I guess you'll have to wait till the next video to see how we're going to go about doing that. But that's going to do it for my video today. I feel like I got a lot done. Rate the video if you liked it, if you like what you see here, if you like what's going on. I hope you guys do. Give me some feedback in the comments section below. And I'll see you in the next Redneck side-by-side update.